we'll also vote on the capital improvement plan and approve some minutes. So we've got a meaty agenda tonight. So Andrew, go ahead.
Try to move your agenda along as best I can. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to the Finance Committee as we do every year. It's really a great part of the process. This allows us to sort of unveil the budget for, not the first time, but certainly from a public perspective, get into some level of detail, which I know that the residents appreciate. I've just noticed that, do you all have the copy of the bound book?
No, we don't have one.
That's because they're sitting in my office, which doesn't really help. So, I believe it, yes, they're on the, right next to the printer in Laura's face. Sorry, so I failed in the first job I was given. Please do not hold this against me. I'm glad that my performance review will not be for several months, because I was given very specific instructions and failed on the very first one. So, plus it's a lot easier to talk about the budget when you guys just have, yeah. Although if I give you the book, the pens go down, so that's a good thing too. No, so Kathy will grab the book and I'll start, and then as she comes in, she'll give you the bound version of the book. So again, I very much appreciate it. As the committee knows, the Revenue and Fixed Cost Review Committee came to the conclusion that 4% seemed to be the sort of target this year as it relates to revenue growth. As the Finance Committee also is aware that there's the fixed cost side of those things, and 4% doesn't necessarily mean 4% across the board for every department, as an example. It really is.
Very much,
it really is a benchmark, a target for us to use as we begin a budget process. I think it's a good sign. It's up from last year and generally indicates some positive trending on the revenue side, although from the state's perspective, their revenue estimates continue to lag behind the overall economy. I think there are some certainly positive directional signs for us, which is good. So we start the budget discussion at a 4%, and then we move from there. The budget book in front of you is requesting 4.1%. We'll talk a little bit about that 10 basis points different, not significant. In large part, what you'll see is that the larger departments, which is very common, police, fire, and schools, as an example, get very close, if not at that 4% target. And other departments really go up and down depending on a number of circumstances. For many of the operational, or what the private sector would call back office departments, they're fairly static. There's not a lot of dramatic change in those. The cost to operate the departments, the cost of staffing really go up at some percentage between 2 and 3% on average, in some cases even less than that. And in some departments, there are certain events that occur from year to year where you may see some dramatic change. Clerk would be an example. You may have 3 elections in one year, 2 in the next. Presidential election has a far greater cost than a non-presidential. So as a clerk, as an example, you may see a decline or a decrease from one year to the next. That's really a nature of the particular event that may be occurring in that department. But by and large, we're really talking about increases around the 4% level for the bigger departments. Not much, if any, staff increases, and I'll talk about that briefly. So I'm pleased to submit for your review and consideration the 2018 Town Manager recommended general fund and enterprise fund budgets to the town of North Andover. Those budgets were adopted last night by the Board of Selectmen. Financial plan was developed and adopted along the lines of the budget policy statement as a guidepost, and that was adopted back in October of 2016. During the 5-year financial forecast presentation in December, I had commented on the fact that based on the Revenue and Fixed Cost Review Committee's report, that we'd see increases of no more than 4% on a budget basis, and I think that this budget moves forward with that, as I mentioned. It is important to note that the goal in establishing a milestone for budget growth provides each department with a framework for making annual requests for funding, but doesn't guarantee that that funding will be approved or, if not, justified. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that as relates to different departments. This is why you may see fairly large differences in the percentage increases and sometimes decreases between various departments. Important to note that our professional staff works diligently to prepare thoughtful and thorough budget requests, being mindful of doing what's in the best interest of the town. So it's an important point to stop there to say what has been great, certainly during my experiences, and I think you folks have seen the same, is departments ask for what they need. They don't look at that benchmark and say, okay, we can go from line item to line item and multiply by 1.04 and come up with a number of 4%. They truly look at their budgets, and from our perspective, those folks who review the budgets and ultimately make a recommendation It makes our job easier to recognize that the professional staffs in these departments are looking for funding that is based upon what they truly believe their department needs, and we've certainly found that over the last several years, and it is appreciated and should be noted. Now, although the 4.1% total budget increase exceeds the framework provided to departments, largely due to increases well in excess of 4% in several of the departmental fixed cost area, and again, we'll get into some detail, but things like health insurance and retirement, those costs are certainly escalating faster than 4% and have been for several years, quite frankly. And so in order to offset those increases, we don't always give 4% across the board for all departments. Some other particular items in that category that have some stressors, debt service, although we're managing that well, workers' compensation, and our retirement settlement are the most notable amongst those. 2016 certainly was an extraordinary year, and I mean, calendar 2016, we often talk about things in the context of fiscal years, but in our case, there was 2 fiscal years, obviously part of each fiscal year in the calendar of 2016, and it should be noted that that was the year that we made a AAA bond rating for the first time in the town's history. It marked the 2nd rating increase in the last 5 years, and really is a tribute to all the work of all the departments and the appointed boards and elected boards throughout the community. It's important, and we've made note of the fact that we believe sustainability is a primary function of our government. We look forward to building reserves. In fact, over the last several years, with your support, we've funded reserves for new programs. And since 2012, we've added an OPEB stabilization, a capital stabilization, a SPED stabilization, an OPEB trust fund, and we've grown reserves from a modest aggregate level of $851,000 back in '08, and as a percentage of budget was really damn near broke, quite frankly, to a number where in total that number exceeds $18 million today. Continuing with the same theme, at the upcoming town meeting, I'll recommend a curriculum revolving fund as an article on the town meeting warrant, and that will dedicate up to $250,000 a year to updating and keeping current the resources our teachers and students need to succeed. So a curriculum revolving fund where we're taking the Medicaid reimbursements, instead of putting them into the general fund, you'll notice on the revenue side that category is now zeroed out, and we'll direct those funding specifically to improve and replace curriculum within our school district. Fiscal stability is certainly not enough to maintain the quality of life that we've spoken about in the past. Equally important is our stewardship to our assets. In 2012, we committed to a plan to invest in our bricks and mortar infrastructure. 2016 marked the completion of the 4th project in that plan, a newly expanded and renovated town hall where we sit today. This project was after constructing a new central fire station, new school administration building in 2015, and as you know, we're not done. In 2017, we'll open an expanded and renovated DPW building, the picture of which is in the front of our budget today, if you want to take a look at what it will look like when completed. And we will construct a new kindergarten-only school building that will open in August 2018 as part of a long-term goal to reduce average elementary classroom size, we hope, to the statewide average of 19.6, today 23.5, something I think we all can agree is probably one of our more important goals over the next 5 to 10 years. The plan will conclude with an expansion of a senior center in 2020, and we're on schedule to do that, and we'll be requesting the design dollars for that as part of the capital improvement plan that hopefully you'll support later tonight. But as we all know, spending is actually not typically the hard part, right? Paying for it is the hard part. And in our case, all of these projects, $30+ million in total, will be paid for without a debt exclusion override and without adversely impacting our services. Now, the stewardship piece to our plan is not limited to our buildings. We've committed and begun upgrading all of our town and school playgrounds. We've spent more than $5 million on roadway improvements during the past 5 years and plan to spend another $6 million during the next 5 years. Some additional initiatives that will be continued into fiscal 18. These are items which either will be new in 18 or will continue from 17 into 18, which are consistent with our priorities are that North Andover will become the first community in the Commonwealth to agree to free curbside textile recycling. We started the progress of aggregating our residential electric load to provide residents with a price stability and the opportunity to choose a greener mix of product. We've developed our own resident reporter tool, which is aggressively used by our residents, that allows residents to track our own responses to calls for service. We've recently implemented a budget tool that I know you folks are aware of, put it on our town's website, and allows residents to get an opportunity of truly understanding where each and every tax dollar that they spend will provide us as part of our funding source goes on an annual basis. We have required GPS devices to be placed on our contracted plowing equipment to increase efficiency and accountability. We've developed our own town North Andover app that allows residents quick access to important information. Water and sewer rates have remained unchanged for 5 years, and through this budget recommendation will remain unchanged for 6 years. In concert with nonprofit partners, we've added more than 100 acres to our protected open space and conservation land, and today more than 5,500 acres of town land and more than 70 miles of public trails are protected for future use by our residents and visitors to our community. And it's certainly an important aspect of who we are as a community. In fiscal 2018, some of the revenue highlights. The revenues for fiscal 18 in this recommended budget total $95,876,000, or a 4.1% increase compared to 2017. The revenues are estimated to increase by approximately $3.8 million. $3 million of that is a function of property taxes, which represents approximately 77% of all revenue generated in our community, so 77 cents of every dollar we spend. In addition to that, we've seen increases in local receipts, specifically a $300,000 increase in motor vehicle excise. This is the second consecutive year that we've seen an increase in motor vehicle excise of $300,000. We view motor vehicle excise as a leading indicator to what's happening in our economy, and so we continue to see positive results in that way. Until the final state budget is signed by the governor, we'll not be certain about what final state aid looks like. It was a very modest increase proposed through House 1, the governor's budget at the end of January. So as has been the practice to conservatively budget, we'll only assume at this point that state funding will be level funded moving forward. From an expense perspective, the budget has an equal amount of expenses to revenue at $95,876,000, or again, a 4.1% increase. Of particular note in the non-departmental fixed costs area, which I mentioned at the outset, category represents 28% of all general fund spending. So we often talk about schools and police and fire and those other services that residents see, but 28% of our entire budget is funding certain fixed cost categories which people don't necessarily see. It's the cost of doing business, and quite frankly, it can be fairly expensive. The budget recommendation incorporates the Revenue and Fixed Cost Review Committee's estimates, as well as adding recommendations made under capital and reserves that will again give you a little more detail in a minute. An additional $656,000 for expected health insurance increases this year, premiums a little over 6%. That brings the total of all spending in that category to $26.8 million of the proposed budget. When we exclude the reserves from this particular category, we see an increase of approximately 6.2% year over year. The retirement assessment of $4.8 million is an increase of $332,000 from fiscal 17. It's based on the funding schedule, which is independently prepared for the Essex Regional Retirement System, of which North Andover is the largest member, comprising 15% of that entire system. The 7.5% increase in this category should be expected annually for the next decade or more. Last year was a little over 8%. So somewhere between 7.5% and 8% we should expect to see as an increase in our retirement appropriation for years to come. Health insurance premiums for active and retired employees are conservatively projected to increase this year by 6.2%, although the actual rate increase will not be known until March, until the decision of the GIC. Current year spending in this category is tracking very well, and it's possible the actual fiscal 18 increase could be below 5%, but we just won't know until the year progresses. It should be noted that we were averaging 12 to 15% increases annually in health insurance for the 5 years that predates the move to the GIC. So not only do we lower the cost of premiums and save $3 million as part of the migration to the GIC, I used to produce a slide that showed the growth of what our health insurance would be versus the growth under the GIC, and that deviation, that spread between the two, would have meant an increased cost to the community by 2025 of more than $12 million. And I think, given some of the numbers I've seen more recently, that spread is probably larger. So the move to the GIC means aggressive alteration of benefit design to keep premiums in check, and as a function of that, giving employees more choices on health insurance and making them more active participants in their own health insurance product, which is good for the employee and, quite frankly, good for the town. There are projected increase in other town insurance count. The most notable one is the increase of 54.4% over the past 2 years, or 29.3% from fiscal 17 to fiscal 18 in workers' compensation to increase claims. We're currently working on different training programs to try to address some of the claims experience that we're seeing, to try to drive workers' compensation premiums back to their more historic levels. Last year, a retrospective 3-year review of unemployment compensation led the recommendation to decrease this category by $25,000 from $75 to $50 after a $50,000 decrease 2 years ago. It's also anticipated we're going to see at least 2 additional students as Essex Aggie. We're seeing an increase in enrollment at Essex Aggie, a flat enrollment at Greater Lawrence Technical School. The Essex Aggie costs are therefore going up. We're estimating an $82,000 increase this year in technical school funding costs because of increased enrollment in that category. I would expect with the new facility there, the nature of their program, and opportunity for sort of a unique educational experience, I would expect we'll see some additional students continue to migrate from our public schools to the technical school over the next couple of years. Capital and reserves, this line item within the non-departmental category includes recommended and required transfers for various reserve accounts we've set up in the past. That total is approximately $1.3 million. Up by approximately $135,000 in fiscal 17. Specifically in this recommended budget, we're recommending $350,000 be placed into the Capital Stabilization Fund. That's the same amount as last year, representing again the second straight year of $350,000. We're recommending an increase of $159,000 into the General Stabilization Fund to make sure we achieve the 5% reserve standard within our financial reserve policies. Both of these requests will be funded with free cash. I'm recommending the continued funding of the OPEB Trust Fund with a transfer of $200,000 into the account from free cash in 18. We've also included another $50,000 from the operating budget into the OPEB Trust Fund, making the total investment in the OPEB Trust Fund $250,000. I am likely also to recommend an article as part of the town meeting warrant that moves some portion of the OPEB Stabilization Fund balance into the OPEB Trust Fund. And we certainly, whatever questions you may have about that moving forward, but I think for most folks, we understand what the difference is, okay? School and municipal government spending, the approved school department budget, which I support, reflects an increase of 4% in fiscal 18. I'm recommending total municipal spending outside of those costs previously identified, those fixed costs, increase by 1.6% in fiscal 17. However, for many of the larger municipal departments, police and fire as an example, I'm recommending increases in excess of 3%, including 3.8% increases in our public safety departments when adding in the reserves. So we have the public safety department requests like police, and in each of those particular departments, we also have a public safety reserve set aside for certain costs such as retirements and retirement costs. When you add those two together within the budget, you'll find that you're a little over 3.8% in both the police and fire. On a case-by-case basis, for some departments, such as the Stevens Library, Memorial Library, and the Town Accountant, the budget recommendation will also exceed 3%, primarily due to staffing increases. Specifically, in the Town Accountant's budget, the reallocation of staffing costs of the payroll coordinator back from a consolidated position within the school into the Town Accountant's budget will cause that increase. So it's a staff shift causing the Town Accountant's budget to increase while the shared service cost would go down. It should be also noted that as a percentage, the Stevens Memorial Library has seen the largest increase in staffing of any department during the past 5 years, schools included. Also notable are the significant decreases in the town clerk's budget, as I mentioned previously, associated with the election, and a significant decrease in the community development department, which is a function of the decreased funding of the master plan. So last year we placed $100,000 in their budget for the master plan. This year we're including some additional funding to fund the consultant. That's less than the 100. By next year that amount will drop off and you'll see a further decrease. From a staffing perspective, the school department, and I'm sure they'll at their meeting with you will explain in more detail, their approved budget for fiscal 18 recommends an increase of 5.25 full-time equivalent employees, 3 of which are elementary teachers, 1 of which was funded in last year's budget. There's also a request for a 1.0 FTE K-6 math coach, an increase of 0.25 FTE reading intervention support, and a 1.0 FTE increase, again, as a result of moving away from the shared services environment for payroll and accounts payable. On the general fund, staffing in fiscal 18 is up 1.52% over 17. 1 additional FTE is a result of, again, that position we were talking about. 1 FTE is a result of moving the cost associated with one of these shared IT people into this category. So it wasn't a staff add. We're just reallocating the funding of the last remaining IT person out of the specific school budget into this funding source. Okay? So they're not an additional person, although on our staffing count, it'll appear that way. It's moving the funding of the person. That's all that's really happening. So at net, it's really a 0.52 increase, and that's comprised of a 0.19 increase by increasing the part-time schedule of the Veterans Department, and a that is based on adding 2.5 hours to that part-time schedule. That person is not eligible for benefits now, and the 2.5 hours don't change that. And finally, the 0.33 FTEs are the resulting increase of a number of hours being added to 2 part-time library staff as a recommendation of the library department at the time they submitted the budget. As it relates to sports services, this category, those departments which deliver services to both school and the municipal government, in other words, what we call shared services. For budgeting purposes, the cost to operate these departments are established and accounted for prior to allocating the remaining funds. So we agree when we come together, we're going to fund those shared services first, and then use the remaining dollars and allocate them between school department and other municipal departments. That's technically how we go through the process. In fiscal 18, this category is recommended to decrease by $47,000, or 2.7%, again, largely attributable to the shifting of some of these dollars from shared services, i.e. the payroll position, back into the town budget. So it's just moving dollars around, quite frankly, and that's part of the reason you'll see the decrease. Water and sewer and enterprise funds in the Stevens estate, in total, both of which all three are doing extremely well. That's the bottom line as it relates to all three. Water and sewer funds continue to track as we intended. 5 years ago, we made a pretty dramatic and conscious effort to reduce debt service within both of those funds, to become more realistic about what we're spending for capital improvements. Its goal was twofold. One is to establish consistent rates. We're going up and down on our water and sewer rates, creating uncertainty within our ratepayers and, quite frankly, in some years, excessive costs. And two, our ability to make sure that we only fund those projects we can actually deliver on. And in both cases, it's resulted in some really impressive results. We have the proper number of reserves on a monthly basis. How many months of coverage we have, those have increased to the point that we're very comfortable with those reserves. In both the water and sewer case, the increase to their budgets is less than 1% in the recommended budget. So if you look at the reserves being transferred to do pay-as-you-go capital, that number looks high. But if you remove that pay-as-you-go from retained earnings, then the net increase in both of these budgets, one is water is 0.2% and sewer is 0.69%, which is why earlier I was able to make the comment that we're not going to increase water and sewer rates, because quite frankly, when you're increasing budgets at less than 1% and maintaining services, and you can make that statement without a lot of risk. As it relates to the Stevens estate, things are going well. The business is solid, and they continue to started the process last year of using a portion of their retained earnings to reinvest in the facility, which is important. And ultimately, we continue to move down that road. You'll see the expenses of the Stevens estate go up, because remember, the nature of that business model is, as business goes up, expenses go up. So if we have more events, we have to buy more alcohol, we need more staff, and as a result of that, the increase in expenses is not being driven by the need for expenses, it's being driven by the need to cover the event costs. And so that model is a little different and certainly unusual. I'm not sure how many municipalities operate function facilities. My guess is one. But overall, the fact you see the increase in the expenses there should not be a concern. I do foreshadow in this that although it is great that the Stevens estate is investing their retained earnings back into the facility, that entire site, its physical assets, will require several $1 million of repair in the long term. And as a community, we're going to need to make a decision about what that means. And I continue to signal that. The board's heard me in the past. I guess I don't want to wake up one day and someone said, you didn't tell me. And I think this is one of these cases that we've heard the message. So we appreciate and support the Stevens estate as a business and the fact that it's made progress. I think in the long term, we need to take a view of the Stevens estate and try to make a decision as it relates to all of the assets in that location as to how we want to move forward. So in summary, that's the budget in brief. So 200+ pages summarized in somewhere like 20 minutes, which isn't so bad. We're here to answer questions. We know over the next couple of meetings, various division heads will be here and supporting staff to answer any specific questions you have. I'm certainly available now or after the Community Service Division comes up to answer any other questions that you may have.
Thank you for the great overview.
It continues the good news story of good planning and solid, a solid process that generates outcomes that people are happy with and that keep us within our means and improve value to the taxpayers of North Andover. So that's my comment to start. Are there any other comments from the
I'm going
committee?
to reserve mine until after we've heard from our guests.
Okay.
I guess one question, if I might, and it's more of a macro question. Obviously, we've got good momentum, things are moving forward nicely. But in the bigger picture, there's this sort of cloud on the horizon of inflation and higher debt service costs. How do you see that playing out over the next year?
So one of the things we've done, part of the reason we've worked aggressively to reduce the overall debt service coverage we have, you may recall that on the enterprise funds, we're at 45% debt service of total spending, 45 cents of every dollar. On the public side, on the general government side, we're averaging about 5.5%. We can carry 5.5%. I think the reason that we were not, so our average, our bogey is between 4 and 6%
Right.
of debt service. Part of the reason that we have agreed to sort of bring that number down to a more conservative one was, one, we needed to build reserves, and two, it is a secondary benefit of giving us some room as those interest rates change, so that the plan would not need to be altered in any dramatic fashion. So we certainly have the option of altering a plan if we go up some increase that I don't think any of us foreshadow.
Right.
But if we go up 100 basis points on average or something like that, part of the reason for driving the debt service cost down again was those twofold effect. The immediate effect and the ability to create a capacity to go back up as high as 5.5% or 6%, which may very well be just funding this plan, but at higher interest rates. So we can sustain that. Ultimately, I wouldn't want to travel 10 years at 6%. But we've prepared for that. We've given ourselves enough room to make sure that we'll have time to talk about the impact that kind of debt service increase would have.
Right.
We've also been, as Ms. Blake has asked the questions in the past, we're aggressively paying down our debt faster than the amortization schedules require. We have an average, I think our average payback is a little over 11 years, what I've presented in the past. And part of the benefit of doing that is paying off debt, and part of it is to give you the ability that if you need to expand that within the legitimate constraints of funding, then we can go to the more traditional standards. So even though a particular project may allow 20% and we're paying it off in 16, 17%, 17 years, we could go back and start to spread that out to make sure that the budget. So we've given ourselves the ability to have that kind of conversation over multiple fiscal years rather than to have to put the brakes on
Right.
and reverse course.
Good. Thank you.
I have maybe one question. I don't think it came up, and I don't know if it comes up in this cycle. But along that way, with now the returns on assets going up again, the interest rates going up, so any savings account eventually interest or the returns are going up, that might have an impact on the funding gap in a pension fund. Now, I don't know how many times it will be updated. You see the allocation to North Andover might go down because of that?
It's possible. So the assumption within the actuarial study is 8%, an 8% return on investments. At one point, it was 8.5. That was pretty common. There are a little north of 100 retirement systems in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That number has changed. It used to be 106. I think it's 104. The common standard was an 8.5% return. And back in the good old days, 8.5% was pretty easy to make. And so you were restating your actuarial studies, say, every 3 years, which was more common, and it was always heading in the good direction. What retirement systems have done, and Essex is no different, is start to reduce that return on investment assumption down, in this case, to 8%, and I think you may even see some further direction toward 7.5%, so that you have some room to play. I would say that the question really is, do you have sustained appreciation or market growth? If we're talking about a year of 10 and a year of 6, that isn't necessarily, without any explaining any detail, a 10 and a 6 isn't necessarily an 8, depending upon the compounding effect of what happens with money. So if we can see multiple years above that target, then yes. then as part of a every other year actuarial restatement, we would see a lower impact on our retirement assessment. So the way the actuarials work is that they are done, I think it's every 2 years under the current cycle. They look at the actual performance, and then they restate that same funding schedule. So there is a set funding schedule, and therefore, if the return on investment is greater than expected, that would mean that our individual appropriation would go down. Retirement Board actually has two choices. We don't make those choices, the board does. They can use the value created by higher appreciation than what was anticipated and shorten the schedule, leaving the appropriation the same, or they can keep the schedule the same and reduce the cost of the individual communities. But if we could see some sustained, steady north of 8% growth, you could see a reduction from the numbers that we're projecting. So Kathy Darby's here. She's a director of our Division of Community Services, and she's got some other staff members here as well. I think Kathy's going to talk a little bit about the veterans and answer any questions you have about the Veterans Department, which is one of the Community Service Division departments. And then someone's going to flip a coin to see if senior center folks or library folks go first, but Kathy will talk about the veterans.
Thank you. So, good evening. Nice to see you all again. So,
Folks, we've had a few new members, and maybe we could start with Sasha and just sort of introduce ourselves.
Hi, Sasha Weinrich,
nice to meet you.
first year on the finance committee.
Yeah.
Liz Guerin, third year.
Yeah. Yeah. And Kathy Darby, almost 6 years now. So I'm here on behalf of Jerry McGuire, who is unable to be here tonight. And I want to say that he does both he and the office assistant, Crystal Clooney, who is new. Last year, we had a retiree who came back part-time to assist us for a short period. And she ended up in the senior center, so we're delighted to continue to have her, and it seems to be working out for everybody. Really, the only change from the last cycle through this one is that we've asked for an increase of 1.5 hours from 18 to 19 and a half hours. It doesn't seem like much, but it does make a difference. I've walked by the Veterans Department and literally seen people waiting in the hallway to speak with the Veteran Service Officer, Jerry McGuire. There is a high walk-in visit, number of visits that he sees, people on a daily basis. Another thing that is different this year from last year is we're starting to see homeless veterans. Jerry has been able to place people in single-room occupancy, housing immediately. I don't know how he does it, but he is well connected and networked with the Northeast Veterans Association. And through that network, he's able to connect the veterans with some housing. Right now, he's in the middle of a different fundraiser. He's collecting twin sheets for some of these veterans that are in these single-room occupancy housing structures. So they'll be receiving a donation of sheets. Every time I walk past the office, it looks like Macy's because there's boxes of sheets. So I suppose that's the good news, that people who are in need of our assistance are being helped. Yeah. North Andover residents, we have approximately 40 participants on our Chapter 115, which is state benefits. We also provide motorized wheelchairs free of cost. He'll pick them up anywhere and deliver them to veterans who need them as well. And because we don't have storage here at Town Hall for motorized wheelchairs, they actually are in his garage at his home.
No, that's really great. I'm just looking through the budget now, and I noticed that, and I think it's great to see the uptick in veterans and in veteran services being provided. And my question is kind of informational. Is it a new wave, sort of veterans from 21st century conflicts that's
Yes, we
coming
are.
now, or is it changing needs from earlier veterans?
I think it's actually a combination of both. I think it's changing needs. We are seeing older veterans who are living longer with more serious health conditions that are ending up being a little bit frail. We are seeing requests for assistance with some sort of modifications in the home. And unfortunately, we are starting to see an uptake in some substance abuse issues with some of the younger returning veterans as well.
Two questions. One is, how can we as a community get the message out to help more? Question one. And then two, sort of kind of factual, how many veterans, go through and touch your group, your folks, on an annual basis?
I wish I had the answer to that question. I'm sorry, I just don't know. I know that there are a lot that come through, but I just couldn't give you a number of the traffic. We do have 40 participants that are receiving benefits now. And if there is some reason, there obviously have to be North Andover residents. And so if there's somebody who is not a resident that we're not able to assist, Jerry will refer them to the appropriate community. And again, he has connections with the statewide Veterans Association as well. And what was your other question, Chris?
Just in general, is there anything that we as a town can do to help you get the message out to help? Because it does sound like this is a growing area and relies on, a relatively small budget that has a very large impact on these folks' lives.
I think just to continue to network amongst your own circles, Jerry uses Facebook, we're on the website, he uses social media, he's out in the community frequently.
So it'll also,
So-
if I can interrupt
Yes.
you briefly, it'll also, one is the folks that are certainly coming out of the service are getting some advice as they're leaving the service.
Yes.
So there's sort of a debriefing process that gives them an overview of the benefits they may be eligible for. Additionally, whether it's the Invets clubs or other kinds of veterans organizations,
Yes.
Jerry will meet in those organizations, actually visit those organizations, which allows them to make personal contact around.
That's great.
Right. And he also serves Boxford as well. I don't have Boxford statistics because their funding is separate from the towns, but certainly he does provide assistance and support to Boxford as well.
Okay, thanks.
So how about helping them with employment, for example? Is there anything, special, program in town to help to reintegrate them into more, civil, professional work
Just to
environment?
take a step back to what the VSO does, because I think it's important to understand that. The Veteran Services Officer in communities is a statutory position, and its intention is to be that conduit between the veteran and benefits they're entitled to. So 75% of all dollars that we pay to these veterans under certain statutory requirements are reimbursed to us through the Commonwealth. So what you see in the budget on page 173, about 90% down the actual budget document, the largest appropriation, is us distributing dollars based on a very specific model as to what's reimbursable, and then we get that back on the cherry sheet. That's the primary role in addition to outreach. That being said, although Jerry does a level of outreach in terms of the areas we're talking about, it is not necessarily intended, nor in most communities does it serve as sort of the catch-all for all of veterans' services that may be available. So Jerry's job is certainly to administer this program which is a very specific program, and provide other opportunities and outreach or provide direction to those
Yes.
veterans to other resources that exist, not necessarily to be the sort of primary or sole place for a veteran to go. Okay? Some communities share this as we do. So in Boxford's case, we provide the VSO services for Boxford, which is allowed under the statute. So again, the state law says every community must have a veteran services officer, but you can do so in a collaborative fashion. And then Boxford reimburses us a pro rata share of the total spending based upon the number of veterans served. So it's important to understand the role that although we're trying to do, and Jerry goes sort of beyond the script, it's complementary, it's not necessarily intended to be the place where is the primary focus for all of veteran services. He's a facilitator, and he's a facilitator even as it relates to these benefits, right? He's taking forms and passing them along to make sure there's compliance.
Right.
I think that's fair.
Just to speak
Yes.
from personal experience, it's very difficult to navigate, so to have that resource, my husband was active duty Army. So to have that resource, and Jerry helped him with the appropriate paperwork, and just to know it's phenomenal and really makes a difference.
Cherry sheet, dollar for dollar?
75% of the 115 benefits,
75%. And the rest?
not reimbursed.
Okay. Does this fluctuate a lot
In terms of the number of people serviced?
in terms of the percentage?
No, it's been pretty hardwired for as long as I've remembered, quite frankly.
Has there been discussion about increasing?
I haven't heard any. No, I have not heard any.
Yeah, it just seems that this may be a growing area.
And I'm sorry, I misspoke. 95%, not 75%. I had the wrong number, sorry.
Okay.
I had 95 up here and 75 came
And
out.
75. All right,
Senility is tough.
Yeah, tell me.
95, it's 20%.
Yeah, but
What's 20% of $300,000? I can answer that question. But go
Yeah, okay. Well, it just seems
95%,
like
yes.
the demand and need in this area from our veterans may be something that is going to be on the uptick.
Yeah.
Especially with the drugs problems, but homelessness, all of that. I know that's beyond our immediate examination here, but it's good to know that the Commonwealth has got those needs in mind, and we have this service available. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kathy, for,
Mhm.
Oh, sure. You're welcome.
yes.
Okay. I'll make room.
Good evening. Hi, everyone. Irene O'Brien, Director of the North Andover Senior Center, and this is Carla Alstrom, who is the Assistant Director. Carla worked as the outreach coordinator.
No.
Where am I?
I was the program coordinator prior
coordinator.
to stepping into this position.
Outreach position.
And my first job at the senior center was a part-time receptionist.
So
So
she's moved up.
I've kind of gone through the ranks.
Through the ranks, right.
And the hardest job is reception.
It is. It is. I challenge any one of you to come and sit at our reception desk for an hour, and you would not believe the traffic and the phone calls that come through the building. Just come, fill in. We always need fill-ins. So, anyway, we're here to tell you about the growth in North Andover Senior Center and how wonderful it is and how supportive the town is to us. Over the past year, we've been fortunate that our tax work-off program has increased by 5. We've added 5 people to it last year, and the amount went up to $1,000. So that means we have, is it 40 people? 40 folks out in the community that are doing work for different departments throughout the community. from the police department, fire department, the library, the youth center, Stevens Estate, water department, yeah, conservation, community development, all the departments. I think we got them pretty much all covered with tax work-off people, and the response back is always very, very positive. The folks have to put in 100 hours of volunteer time, and then they receive back $1,000 off one of their tax bills, real estate tax bills. So it's a great program and doing very well. So we were very happy that the town manager increased the number there. We do have, it's interesting, we get about 50 to 60 people will take out applications, and out of that applications, maybe 50 of them will come back. We do a lottery drawing, and we'll choose the 35 to 40 people that we're allowed to have in the program. But we pick all the numbers, and usually by the end of the 50 people, every one of those persons has been in the program, because someone will drop out, so someone else will get to pick up that time. Because in order to reap the benefits, you have to complete the 100 hours. So, or they'll just decide that they don't like the schedule, or they don't like who they're working for. So it's really kind of always been a pretty much a wash on that end, that everybody does usually get into the program. So it's worked out very well.
Do you find that people, after they do their 100 hours, do they stay on?
Oh, yes, actually, yes, many of them
Okay.
do. And we're very fortunate at the senior center, because we also have some tax work-off folks, and our council on aging board member, we hooked him in, Joe Sergi, who is the director of the council on aging. He started out as a data entry person for us, and he still does the data entry and is now on our board. So that
wonderful.
was a really win-win for us.
Oh, it gets
Yes, yeah,
so,
so, and it does happen that they are, I know, in the community development, there are a couple of folks that keep their fingers crossed that they get chosen, because they want to go there, because they go back there every year, and once they complete their 100 hours, they do stay on and do more. So it's a really a great win for the town. Okay, would you like to speak on one? Want to just go down the list?
Yes, we
The new
can.
van?
We were able to secure a new van through the capital improvement fund, and that now seats 14 passengers. So it allows us to increase ridership in trips, transportation to and from the senior center, and also for grocery shopping.
Our formula grant, we receive a state formula grant through the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and over the last 4 years, we've seen the funds we receive is per person, per senior in the community. Unfortunately, it's by the 2000 census, or 2010 census, but it's every 10 years, right? 2010. So we're waiting for the 2020 census to come through, because there'll be a huge jump for us. But this year, the funds were went up to $10 per elder, so we receive about a $53,000 grant, which covers 5 part-time folks that work at the senior center.
So what's the criteria for being an elder? I mean, do they count every elder despite the fact that they don't take part in the senior center?
Oh, yes, in the community,
So-
yes,
So what's the criteria?
60 and over.
There you go.
Yeah, you're just, as long as you do your census, that's the important thing.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely really important you do that, because that makes the difference in our numbers completely.
And speaking of town census, the growth of the senior population, which is 60 and older, has increased each year. Tentative 2017, it will be 3%. By 2030, it'll be even more so, such that the amount of seniors within the town of North Andover will probably exceed 9,000, and it will be a higher percentage than those that are in the school system.
Right, well, it already is.
Well, it is now too, but I
Right,
meant
yeah,
in terms of,
yeah.
it's just growing. It's going to continue, not unlike the veteran services situation.
Right,
So,
right. All right, how about the early else funds?
sure. Entering into the role of outreach manager, I took a training course at the Alzheimer's Association so that I could be a certified facilitator. And so we do a Alzheimer's support group once a month in the fall and in the spring. And our program is a bit unique in that we offer it to the caregiver as well as the individual with the diagnosis. So there's 4 of us actually that facilitate that support group. 2 of us work with the ones with the diagnosis, and then the other 2 are with the caregiver. So I have to say that I field a lot of phone calls from family members and caregivers asking where they can go and what they can do and how to get the help. And again, that also is going to increase because people are living longer, and there isn't the same kind of research and funding for Alzheimer's disease as there is for heart disease and some of the other diseases out there. So, but it's a valuable program, and I hope that we'll be able to continue to offer that.
You're actually functioning as a facilitator.
I am.
And I can't draw an analogy to Jerry Maguire, but you are actually trying to give people who are affected by Alzheimer's a look at all of the services
Yes.
that they could pull together at any one time, and there are lots of them.
Absolutely.
How do you coordinate with SHINE?
SHINE program is through Merrimack Valley Elder Services, and that's a volunteer program. They do the training for that, but their focus is on Medicare and Medicaid and health insurance needs for the seniors.
Well,
So,
that's part of it,
yeah.
the Alzheimer's equation, too.
Yeah, it is on some level, but I tend to see more of those that are living with or caring for a person
yes,
with
I
the
see.
disease.
At
And
home.
this is an early onset, early stage Alzheimer's, so it's getting them in there when they've recently been diagnosed.
I
And
see.
it allows the one with the diagnosis to really participate in a support group.
I know you were working on this last year
Yes.
to
Yeah.
get this together, and now we're seeing it in operation.
In operation,
Yeah,
yes.
and you're having a demand.
3 years ago, we received a national award for this program, and we're the only site throughout Merrimack Valley that has this particular program that's a support group for the person with the diagnosis as well as the caregiver. They're separated when they're when they come to the senior center. Each group goes in a different direction, and it gives the caregiver a chance to vent with other caregivers on the situation, and it also gives the person with the diagnosis a chance to share with other people with the same diagnosis their frustrations. And the caregiver is saying, why does my loved one keep asking me the same question? And then they're saying, they don't listen to my questions, so there's a really great exchange, and we have, is it 3 or 4 volunteers that
It's
also?
the 4 volunteers.
Four other facilitators that are a
And the
part of this
group-
program.
The group can grow as much as 10.
Oh, have you
Couples.
had that many?
We have.
You-
Right now, we're at 6, but we're actually doing screenings tomorrow afternoon, so we're hoping to add another 3 for the spring semester.
And the result of this is to allow our seniors to age in place.
Yes.
Yes,
At their homes,
absolutely.
and be able to manage.
Yes.
And I suppose, do you help them with respite care, the caregivers, or no?
No, we don't.
Any resources?
Alternative places that they can go relative to a retirement, group homes, assisted care living, things like
There
this
are
that
many
there are different
assisted
options that
caring
people
livings.
aren't aware of.
Right, well, we can give them books on it, but we do not we can't make a referral. We can give them all their options that are out there, but it's up to them to do their homework and go there and find out what's the best fit for their family member.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're a service-based referral agency. We do a lot of referring out to other folks, to Elder Services in Merrimack Valley. or any of the assisted livings, or everything is referral.
It's good for everyone to know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely. Ground data program?
Just what, unless you have a. Oh, I was just looking towards the FY '18 goals. I noticed that you're doing an assessment and you're also preparing, down the road for changes in the senior center. So, I guess my question is, do you have the resources you need to handle both those things, both those studies at the same time?
Just last week was in touch with Massachusetts Council, with University of Massachusetts, who, through their programs there, they have great referral networks for us to support us through that. They also offer many choices in the statistic end of that, of, the information that we may need. Why don't you speak on that a little bit?
But you just interjected the second part of your question. The programmatic piece will be captured as part of the
CIP.
preparation for the physical building.
Right.
So the programmatic piece will be part of the design phase.
Right.
So the work that Irene and her staff are doing with the assistance of, whether it's UMass or someone else, that will feed into a broader programmatic study once you bring on a design firm at OPM.
Right.
How do you build a facility to match?
Right, what the need is in the community.
Right.
Yeah. And in this case, it's actually, in my opinion, going to be a more dynamic conversation than in some of the other facility discussions we have, because you're building,
For the future.
you're building for the future, and I know I was supposed to say that, and I said to myself, does that make any sense? Right? You're
Yeah.
building for the future, but in cases like police stations and fire stations, that's building for the future and largely around spaces. In this case, there's a real question of
Program, right.
And so, part of the work that Irene's doing as a goal is to feed into the broader programmatic discussion. So let me give you one example. Someone has introduced the idea, should we be providing some kind of adult daycare, as an example? I'm not weighing in on one side or the other. There's a lot of pros and cons and pretty aggressive argument, right? But that's one of those questions that, from a programmatic perspective, can have a real impact on what you deliver as a building back here. So,
Right.
the suggestion of Irene as a goal to put in that kind of study is going to feed into the broader programmatic discussion. It'll come back to my department as part of the building study.
Right.
It just makes so much sense. I would say I had the pleasure you don't really think about this at all, and to recognize the resource we have here already, but then it's sort of like how long is that tunnel? You don't really know what's ahead, and so I can certainly see from a facility standpoint, this is a very significant decision for us as a community.
Absolutely.
Because of the growth factor and, as you say, the range, and, you're trying to build for something that accommodates an anticipated program need. So I can see how a bigger component of our community
Right.
quickly.
When we ran our numbers, every year, with Joyce Bradshaw, we get the listing of elders 60-plus that have come of age, so to say. And this year, when our numbers went up, 920 people in 1 year. So that's turned 60.
Yeah.
So that's like huge. And according to Massachusetts Gerontology, they're saying that by 2050, that's when it will start to level off. The growth is going to continue, and they anticipate, by the size of North Andover now, in 2050, there'll be over 8,000 to 9,000 seniors, 32% of the population in North Andover. So it's like, I was talking to the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and Emmett said to me, he said, if you build it, they'll come. And he said, if you don't build it, you're going to end up with a big dig. He said, you're going to keep putting on extension. So he said, you have to prepare for that. And I have seen that in senior centers that are being built throughout Merrimack Valley, that they're building an addition that isn't even going to be used right now, but it is going to be used in the future.
You know, it's sort of interesting you say it, because I think about, we keep talking about downtown revitalization, and, there's a thought process of what revitalization looks like. But as you say this, it occurs to me, like, there's another way to look at revitalization, because if you have more people involved with the senior center, you drive more interest, more demand downtown. Maybe what the future revitalization of downtown North Andover looks like, maybe shapes more towards,
The population
Yeah.
is coming forward.
yeah, right?
I would say to a certain degree, and here's a philosophical discussion, it actually is what downtown is today.
Yeah.
It really is, because the vast majority, especially as some of the, it's changing now, but as the mills changed away from some of the staff that was there in that transition phase, downtown is absolutely the senior center, we're tenants, they're the owners. We're sort of tenants, they pass through the way that, so most of what you see of Main Street today is largely a result of the activity in Main Street driven by our senior center, the post office, CVS, the facilities we see today, really, that's what it really is about. It's not the stopping traffic, it's the existing traffic.
When does the evaluation of kind of what the program looks like, when does that really start, and how does that process work? Because it's really going to shape, quite frankly, how many dollars you have to put in.
I've never done a needs assessment before, so I'm flying by my bootstraps. And I'm really reaching out to the Executive Office of Elder Affairs to get the information we need. It's a daunting project, they told me, and that I'm going to have to draw on a lot of different resources to get all the information. But,
That's what I think what you're asking, I'll make sure. As it relates to the program to build, or so there's the needs assessment that's gonna, that, as a reference, will feed into the program, which will.
So I guess it's both, right? So
Yep.
yeah, the needs assessment will establish kind of what ultimately your program's going to look like. But really, it's how do you assess how North Andover, basically how much money North Andover wants to spend? Really, how interested is
Right.
the population in putting their tax dollars into establishing?
Well, we've driven it traditionally the other way. So, we start with the constraint. We don't start with necessarily, it's gonna sound somewhat, this doesn't sound good again. We start with the constraint. The constraint is we have an estimated budget cost per addition constraint. We're building an addition onto this building. So inherently, it's already constrained, right? There's only so many spaces. We've already set aside in the projected facility master plan some years ago, the dollars assumed for construction. The question is, do the dollars assumed for construction and the space limitations or opportunities where we're located? You'll then have a footprint. Then you're gonna take that footprint and overlay it over that assessment and figure out which aspects of that you can implement within that footprint. So it's not the assessment. The assessment will give sort of a palette of choices, and the physical construction will then make the hard decisions necessary. I have all these choices, I have this much space, what can I do? I think because one of the things that's missed in the conversation, and not in a negative way, is that the senior population, we have driven a line across a number which we all sort of chuckle at today, don't we? Is 60 the number? The reality is our
75.
senior population is younger, longer, and so the nature of the facility, what a senior center was 20 years ago, is a dramatically different group. Those folks are far more mobile, and so some of those services just, there's not necessarily a symmetry or a synergy is a better word. There's not as much synergy to the services as there used to be. Used to be you build a senior center and the nature of the use was fairly uniform. Different programs, but for the same type of user. Today that user span can be 30 years. There's not a synergy to the use. To Irene's questions about building, and they will come, and I think that's true, is I think what's going to happen in the senior center business is one senior center in one community is not going to be able to serve the span of possibilities within an assessment. Because instead of dealing with 10 or 15 years of age with a specific nature of customer, your customer is going to be too dynamic. And so that customer is going to look not only to us as a resource, but have to look at other places. We won't any longer be the sole resource center. we couldn't afford it to be from a space perspective or a cost of construction perspective. We'd have to build a 50,000, build a high school, right? It's a little bit what it's like. So we're gonna have to be more dynamic about opening up some of our other facilities and opportunities for people who have a use that's not specific to what the senior center could be. So as an example, should the youth center have programs when the youth are not there? And that might be about staffing, but that facility may need to be used on an ongoing basis when the youth aren't using it for seniors, because we can't put every possible use into the building. Does the high school get used? I was in Swampscott, we made a conscious decision to build the senior center into a brand-new high school, so that there's an overlapping level of uses. So I think what you're gonna find with senior centers is that it's just not possible to build a facility that can address the breadth of uses. And we're gonna have to use all of our assets in some way to accommodate a population which wants more from us, but wants it in a different way than we're used to. And so it will be, in my opinion, not just about this building, but using the assessment Irene's talking about and identifying other existing resources where we can offer programs, the regional Y, our own youth center, our own school buildings. And what we'll be responsible for is coordinating those programs and providing the staffing to coordinate the programs in multiple venues. Because I think if you go into this, Irene's already hearing this, I think, to a certain extent, you go into this assuming you can build one building for all the programs our seniors need, you're going to fail. It's not one building.
Makes sense.
Especially when you're looking at the baby boomers, that group they're active, they want activity, they want walking trails, they want to be able to go out kayaking, they want bike riding, they want all those things that are within the community. So how do you tie everything together? So, it can't be all in one building, what Andrew is saying. But the age right now at the senior center, people, it's usually 75 up. And we had a 101-year-old lady in there the other day, who is just amazing. She was in there playing bingo, but, very much with it, and it's the range. I mean, they start around 60 coming in, but they come in and they join most of our news and views groups and things like that, where they're getting engaged, but they're still taking a back step, kind of like, well, I'm not quite a senior.
And going to Florida.
And going to Florida, right, there's still that happening. And it's mostly women in the senior center that come in, and the age is 75 plus, mostly for the basics. So when we're building a new senior center, you have to look at the group that's 50 now, and, where they're gonna be in 15 years. And it's, they want a lot more than what we can offer right now there, and just in technical stuff, and, so.
Okay. Anything else? Great. Well, thank you very much. We really enjoy hearing from you.
I did give you a couple of things.
Yes, the materials are.
Did you get it in the mail?
did.
Did you get
Thank
it?
you.
Our household got it. It was addressed to my wife. I love it.
I did include a packet on an overview, and pieces of this were taken through University of Massachusetts. But I just want to make one comment. I wanted to, on the very back page, I left a list of the different cultures that we actually service on a weekly basis at the senior center. We have folks from Egypt, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, India, Peru, Ukraine, Dominican, Poland, Jerusalem, Pakistan, Ecuador, Russia, France, Italy, Greece, and Peru. And these are folks that have, their children live here, and they brought their parents over here. And a lot of them are becoming American citizens. We're very proud of many of them that do. They come in and they're so proud of what they've accomplished and how they can grow and learn. And I have to say that the community of North Andover and our groups that we have opened arms and welcomed these folks. And some of them come in not being able to speak a word of English. And I'll tell you, we have diversity at the North Andover Senior Center.
Great. Thank you very much.
That's okay. Good evening. Irene's always hard to follow because she's so positive and she's done so many really good things. I particularly liked.
We do a lot of good things together.
We do. That's the really nice part. We
And
do.
with veterans, too. We really do. Yeah.
Thank you. Good night.
I'm Kathleen Keenan, the director of the Stevens Memorial Library. Some of you have met recently. Some of you have come and used the library, and some of you, at least one of you, I think, sat on our long-range planning committee, which was greatly appreciated. The library in North Andover has a really big age range because it's birth until you aren't breathing. So when Irene talks about the span and trying to have services that match those ages, we start at 0. And one of the things that we have in North Andover are a lot of young families with their first children, and there's not a lot for them to do because the children aren't in school yet. So we have a lot of young moms who are in, and they're so happy to get out of the house because it's their first year of being home and not talking to any adults, and the baby doesn't talk yet or the baby doesn't crawl. And so one of the changes for us this year is the change in staff means that we now have added a service that's talking to that group, providing for that group that we haven't had before. We do a lot of joint activities and have tried over the last several years. I'm, like Kathy, I'm hitting an anniversary pretty soon. It'll be 9 years, I think. And the changes in North Andover and the changes in the library are significant. The biggest change is the support from the town. We've been incredibly fortunate. Andrew's been really supportive. He mentioned the increase in staff. The library took a huge staff hit in 2000. So we are today just coming up on the FTEs of where we were in 2000. The thing that's significant about that is that when the staffing cuts occurred and the budget cuts occurred, and it was economic, there was no personal reason, if you will, or no individual reason for it. It's the economics. You can't have things that you can't afford to pay for, and that goes across everything in our lives and in our towns. And the trustees, knowing how important library services were, did not cut the hours. So when I first came here in 2007, they had been maintaining the same level of hours of operation for 7 years with almost 10% fewer staff. That's a long time to go running on a shoestring. And one of the things that has happened by being able to demonstrate the interest that people have in having those kinds of services again, each year we've been able to demonstrate the service demand is there, and we've been fortunate, economy's gotten better, we've been able to rebuild. The beauty in our rebuilding is that we've changed to meet the kinds of questions that people come in. Technology is a huge difference for us. So this past year, it was a sort of a killer of a summer because we had people who retired, and we had part-time staff who left for full-time jobs, which are great opportunities. But as those people left, we looked at the skill levels of who were we replacing. And we didn't replace with the same skills. We were looking for a lot more skills. The skills came in really 2 areas. One is around technology, and the other was around working with people. And the big focus for us has been early literacy. People don't realize it, but your literacy development skills start from the time you're born. So things like hand-eye coordination, the baby starting to crawl, those kinds of things, which we look at as play and physical development, actually map to brain functions. How well are you going to do with reading, and how well are you going to do with math, which of course maps to how well you're going to do in school. And I think today's population is really interested in having their children do well in school. You probably hear the term STEM all the time: science, technology, engineering, and math. Some libraries, some schools have said STEAM because they've put the A back in for the arts. One of the things that research shows is that people who play music instruments, people who sing, do better at math. So there's the part for us. It's like those babies that we think, oh, they're just playing. It's essential to their skill development in a way that we haven't maybe understood from brain science. So early literacy children's librarian, and we can hire really a superb person to do that job. And she's bringing with her a master's degree in early literacy education. She's mapping that for us to what we have, to our building space. If you've walked in the children's room recently, I've had people come in and go, I didn't know you had windows in this room. If you've ever been the outside of the library, there are huge windows on the whole walls. We had rows and rows of bookcases that blocked the windows because it was, in fact, still very much of a warehouse. And a library is changing, and you hear constantly, the new sort of buzz is, oh, libraries are community centers. They always were, but people came there for different things. People now want to come and stay. And so part of our long-range plan, so through the Board of Library Commissioners for Massachusetts, they look at public libraries. There are 359 public libraries in Massachusetts, with meeting certain standards set by Massachusetts, and they're actually set by Massachusetts statute. A library gets certified. As a certified public library, any person holding a library card in North Andover can go and use every one of those other 385 libraries for free. We're lucky because libraries are the automatic sharing pools, and so grassroots, maybe 30 years ago, we formed consortiums because we all wanted computers, but we couldn't afford to buy software and computers by ourselves. We have the Merrimack Valley Library Consortium today. So inside our network, we have 37 libraries. Your card automatically works in 36 towns, all of which you can drive to, and many of them you can bicycle to. The beauty of the consortium is I don't have to own every book. We don't have to have every single program here. If it's a book you need, we can get it for you. It can be delivered here in town, and you can return it here, even though the book came from Worcester or from Boston or from Amherst, Mass. The other thing is, if the program your child is the right age for isn't offered inside Stevens, you can go to Andover, you can go to Haverhill to do this. The reciprocity that exists has been built and is being really supported by the public library system in Massachusetts. So every time our town contributes to our individual library, we're contributing to that entire structure. I said earlier today to Andrew that I really liked reading the summary because it just gave me this really big viewpoint, a really nice overview to the town and the progress that we've seen in the last 5 years, for instance, and the changes. I want staff to read those to understand, you know, we're the cog in the wheels. That's true for all of the public libraries. So that kind of support that you demonstrate here, it's invaluable. You can't measure what it is. We often say in library services, we should figure out a dollar value and tell people, what do you get for having a free library card? And you can't come up with a number. So we're very appreciative in the library. I personally am really appreciative because the support has been there. The support from Kathy, the support from Andrew, the support from the Board of Library Trustees. We have the newest member, Stan, who's really helping us because he knows all kinds of things that I maybe hadn't been exposed to before because he's been familiar with other parts of town government. So this past year, we were successful in our community preservation application. We're fixing the roof. Everybody's really happy to hear that. Someday soon, like, you know, maybe by the summer, there won't be any more buckets and there won't be any more pipes that we're looking at and going, is there water? Is it raining outside? Is it raining inside? You have to take care of the building. We all know building's aged. It's a 1907 building with 2 additions. Buildings don't like additions. They always leak with the additions match up on the roof. It's a given. Every public library I've ever been in with an addition, I can walk in and I can show you the seam and tell you that's where the addition was, even if the paint color's all the same. So as a librarian, you're beginning to develop, have to develop expertise in a lot of different areas. Building maintenance is a huge area. I've learned about AC because we had to replace the entire AC system. Last year's been roofing. This year it's going to be bricks and mortar, literally. You know, the mortar's coming out and the bricks are falling down. We get support from all parts of the town for these kinds of things. We have a tremendous Friends of the Library group. They do so much fundraising for us. Almost all of the programs that you see are funded by the Friends. It's a very small core group, maybe 12 people, who, by the way, would all identify themselves as Grammies and Grampies. And so we have an aging population there. So one of the things we talk about is how do we get younger people interested in being those friends of the library? Irene, we talk about the same thing, Friends for the Senior Center, Friends for the Youth Center. We rely a lot in our community service division departments for the support we get over and above the direct funds. The funds make things possible, they make the buildings possible, they make the buildings habitable and pleasant, and you still need to have, more people in there, so. We feel like it's a really good news year for us. We completed our long-range plan. The Board of Library Commissioners requires us every 5 years to submit a 5-year plan. Because we're part of that big system, it only works when we see that what we're all doing and that we're all planning ahead, which I think Andrew was really pleased to see that there's a renewed emphasis in the libraries that we're planning long-term. We need to, in the same way we talked about the senior center and the change in population. So with the growth in population in the schools, for instance, we're seeing that growth of the children coming into the library. We're seeing a lot of parents, and in some instances, the grandparents as caregivers, they're not all English speakers, so do you have an ESL class? Do you offer conversation circles that, the grandmother can come to while the children are at school, because mom's working? We have very different demographics between our the 5 elementary schools. Probably the single biggest thing for us this year, if I put one thing as the huge success on our part, was our partnership with the school district. We think of the library as the first part of the step in the education process or the education infrastructure. And in many towns and in many people's minds, it's been separated. There's there's before school, and then there's when you're in school, and then when you're out of school. We want lifelong learners. Statistics show that the average person is going to have at least 3, maybe 4 distinct careers by the time they retire. You won't move from job, you won't have a 40-year job at a company like Digital because they're gone. You won't necessarily have the same type of work in 4 different companies. You will change from being a computer programmer to being a school teacher, and then you go into healthcare. Totally different. That requires re-education and reskilling. So one of the commitments we have is find more partners inside the town. The school department, the senior center's been a strong department partner for a long time. The school department this year has really increased what we've done. So one of the things I left was a program about the One Author, One Community series we did this past fall. I'm so proud of it because it shows all the people we talked to, all the people who supported activities, all the people who want to be part of a community where people relate to each other and not, here's where I live and I drive there to work and all my friends are someplace else. This is home, and home has a lot of connections outside just the house itself. So if I can answer questions.
No, I think I'm a regular patron of the library, so I've definitely seen just the amount of programming and activities when I go in from week to week to see how much is going on. And I think the partnership with the schools is just a great example of how when we work together and get out of our, drive out of our offices and walk out of our offices and talk to different people, we really can capture a bunch of synergies and, bring new life and vitality. So I think it's great for the schools and it's great for the library. And I think that partnership of, because there are some kids who come in when they're 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and there are other children who don't. And then if they can get the exposure to, hey, here's your town library, and here's the librarian, and here's how you get a library card, that connection is just going to really help, all sorts of people in town. And like you say, it's a multi-generational thing. So, I'm just very impressed, and I hope my name isn't on any most wanted posters behind the counter.
We don't have those anymore. That's one of the beauties
I
in
know,
North
but
Andover is
I
that.
feel guilty. I like the fines because it just obviated my guilt, and I could just fork over the money and I was all set. But now
You can donate to the Friends.
I know, I really should.
Yeah, that's right, yes.
But no, I think the partnerships have been fantastic, and just like you said, I think one of the things we talked about as a committee earlier this year is just municipal government in all levels is changing, and the skills are changing, and the types of things we do are changing. So to hear talk about the way you approached your human resources at the library is really impressive. That you have to hire for a multiplicity of skills these days, and the ability to do lots of different things very well and work with lots of different technologies and so forth that weren't there. I think that's fantastic. So.
I think by naming the library, we're kind of underselling a little bit what you do. I just pulled up the definition of a library, and it says it's a building or room containing collection of books. That's what you probably think about a library, but what you just, in the last 5 or 10 minutes is impressive. So it's almost, should we rename it to something, how would you say, what is actually your services now?
And one of the things, libraries and the library profession tends to be very traditional. I've discovered over the years that we need to be less traditional, and how we talk about the services that we have has to be different. So the beauty is that we have things like social media today. So Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts, people are constantly getting information that something's happening at the library. And they're like, gee, I didn't know they did that at the library. So it's easier to get people's attention by showing it. In colleges in particular, for instance, and this goes to the tradition part. So the colleges are all renaming their libraries. They're calling them Creative Commons, Common Commons. They're all getting rid of the word library. They're also putting in cafes and coffee, which is probably a stretch for us. But we'll let you bring in your cup of coffee, but we're not running Dunkin' Donuts there yet. So, the word is still there.
Why not? Because I think it's less about the books now.
Very much so. And that's part of the challenge for us. And this is a part where I always feel really great. Librarians are like the biggest recyclers in the world. You hate to get rid of something that somebody might still use, which is why often you would walk into a library and it's crammed to the gills, which makes it a less pleasant space. And so one of my mantras that you people say is, Kathleen's always saying, can't we get rid of that? Can somebody else use it? So in order to make that space in the children's room, to change it from being a book room and a warehouse to a space where families are coming in now and they're staying for half an hour or an hour and finding activities that they can play with the children, which, by the way, are very subtly, in fact, set out as early literacy development skills. They just don't know they've gone to school. And it's both for the parent and the child, that the parent is developing skills about how to work with the child. But we had all this really imperfectly good bookshelf shelving. And we were just able to give 144 shelves with uprights and stuff to the, just go to Kittredge, I think? I think it went to Kittredge. So Kittredge had a storage issue, and they were moving materials from one place to the other. And they didn't want to put everything in boxes in a closet because they knew it would never get used again. So they found a place that they could erect shelving, and because we contact and connect with Steve Foster, Steve says to the principal at Kittredge, I know who's got really good shelving that's public building safety rated for free. All you have to do is come and get it, which they did. And so I understand they've just, started erecting that shelving. So part of that resource sharing, it's not necessarily just the books. Sometimes it's the people. Sometimes it's our furniture, if it's in good condition. Some of it's gone to the Stevens estate, some of it's gone into other school buildings. The other one is sharing the resource. So our children's librarian who supports K through 5 spends half of her time at Atkinson as the elementary school librarian, and the other half of her time during the week as our elementary school librarian there at Stevens. So, and this is a really creative solution that got proposed to us last year by Jen Price, and we're like, we will pilot anything. We'll give it a chance, see if it can work.
And it's rolled out, and it's in place now and really working. So we're using all of our physical assets in town, and our human assets as well, and the working back and forth and filling those empty spaces with productive things is really an achievement. That's just wonderful.
So I guess I would think as you talk about this, I was thinking about that survey that we did and really some significant feedback on it. I think the challenge was that there were so many different visions. You know, I think that was sort of the problem with it is, well, it's the opportunity. It's like, how do you solve the Rubik's Cube? But it was, people saw the facility and the services that could be used in so many ways. It really was almost overwhelming. I look at it and say it's like it's a life education center, right? Because people were thinking about everything from how to facilitate business development to how do I be more economically and environmentally sensitive? How do I, all these sort of things. And I think you've undersold, quite honestly, what some of those findings were. And I think the more the community is aware of that and what the possibilities are already there. You know, it's like you don't necessarily have to make changes in order for people to take advantage of it doing these things. And I think maybe that's maybe some of the challenges that you look at this and there's a perception that you have to do something with the building or the people. But if you've hired that kind of staff, a lot of the vision of what people talked about, I think, could actually be implemented. That was sort of my sense, but it's sort of sitting there on the shelf right now. How do we get that live for you?
Well, part of that is really about people, because in the same way, there's so many analogies to the senior center. It's space for things to happen and space for programs. And programs happen because you have people to plan them, facilitate them, to an extent, get them started and then walk away and come back and check periodically, are they running? And that was a big part of the skills that I looked for. Every person that was hired in this past year has very good managerial skills. They will be able to design and start and set up programs. They will be able to be a facilitator. They'll be able to walk away and watch it from a distance, so they don't necessarily need to be there to do it. It's tough sometimes to find as many of these kinds of skills in a single person. In this instance, I consider we were extremely lucky with the people that applied for our jobs, that they came in with as many different facets of skills that we knew we needed to meet those kinds of goals. Because we looked at a lot of those goals, and a lot of those things can happen in the existing space. Some things like a maker space, and if you hear about the maker space today or the creative labs, and some of the places are huge. They have pottery kilns and they've got, chef classes and cooking. We won't ever attempt to run cooking classes in the library or probably run a pottery kiln. But we can, in fact, bring in portable sewing machines and run a sewing class. One of the local libraries, once a month, they have sewing machines come in, and the kids who are going to the Comic-Cons, to the comic book conventions, who are dressing up, doing cosplay, they had an afternoon where the kids could come in, and with supervision and sewing machines, the kids worked on their costumes. You can also do that right before Halloween. So one of the librarians that we hired this year comes from a theatrical background, and she has owned a costume company. And so one of the things that she had to learn to do was make costumes. So she's offered, if we want during the summer, we'll round up the portable sewing machines and she'll run that exact kind of program.
Cool.
So
That's
the
great.
meeting room is empty.
Yeah.
It's available as space. You find the equipment, you borrow or rent or whatever you need to do to come up with maybe 5 or 10 sewing machines, and now you've got a person with the skills and the ability to organize the program and then run it. Totally different from anything we might have conceived of doing before. And by the way, will it attract an age of children that we're not seeing, the tweens?
Yeah.
14, 15, 16-year-olds. Because every time I hear somebody complain about a teen, the first thing I say is, 5 to 10 years, they're going to be a voter, and they're either going to vote for that town to have a public library or not. We've got to make sure they're interested in the public library now.
Okay.
It is absolutely a pay-it-forward model. So sometimes it's tough because the teens are loud, and They've got a lot of energy because they've been trapped in school all day. Trapped is their word, not mine, of course. Don't tell Jen I use.
There is a librarian. You know, at the high school, they're always looking for people, for help with costumes, if the kids could go down there. That's, you know, that's
Wow.
the kind of connections. We were texting my daughter, you know, there's a librarian that does costumes.
So that's part of it. That's why I talked about like the social media. A big part of this is, do people know we're
Right.
there?
Right, exactly.
And
Can't wait to
beyond the
know about
building.
the Girls Who Code initiative.
So the Girls
Oh,
Who
yeah.
Code, this is the part again where cooperation, learning a little bit more. The internet makes it so much easier to find things you didn't know were possibilities. So the story is that there was a young woman who became a computer programmer, made a very nice living, and looked around and saw that there were not enough women as computer programmers. And so using her position and her earnings, she started a foundation called Girls Who Code. And the goal is to get more girls interested in technology, interested in engineering and in computer programming. So her foundation provides the entire curriculum. So you apply to be a Girls Who Code club. If you're accepted, we provide the room, we provide a facilitator, we provide the equipment, in this instance Chromebooks, all of the curriculum, all of the activities. It's a 10-week series, 2 hours a week. All of the curriculum comes to us. And the facilitator does not need to be able to computer program, they need to facilitate. Is everybody here? Is everybody's computer working? Is anybody having a problem with the mouse? Is everybody on the same web page? So this is one of those really great opportunities. There was a parent who wanted her child, who's in middle school, and therefore doesn't have computer programming in middle school, so she can't take it there, wanted it. And she approached the schools. The Girls Who Codes Foundation is not providing this through schools. They feel schools have their own curriculum. These are for organizations like libraries and boys and girls clubs who aren't education sites, if you will, a traditional school site. So the high school couldn't respond, the middle school couldn't respond, but the library could. Jen Price calls me up and says, I'm sending the mother over, we've got an idea. In the end, the school has provided the Chromebooks, we're providing the space and the facilitator. So we just started, I think we're in week 3. So they're meeting Monday nights for 10 weeks. We have 19 girls who are in middle school who are learning to do computer programming. And it costs us exactly no more money. 19 girls. So recommended class size is no more than 20, and that's a standard number if you're teaching something like a computer class. But in this instance, the building was there, the room is open, the heat is on, the lights are on, there's a staff member paid to work, the school invested in the Chromebooks, and we're getting all of this free resource from the foundation in the form of the curriculum. No. So that's an example of an opportunity. Those are the things that we're looking for all the time. And again, I keep talking about the staff skills. So the new head of the Children's Services, her undergraduate degree is in chemistry with a minor in Japanese. Not your average children's librarian's education. She worked as a chemist for a number of years when she got out of school, decided she wanted to do something different. She went back to school and got a library degree. So I have this incredible scientist in the children's room who is incredibly comfortable writing grants. So she's working, so she's been there 120 days. She's already written and received a grant for $1,000 for us for our summer reading program. She has 3 more grant applications, I believe, that she's writing. You know, free from the foundation like the Girls Who Code, a grant application from another organization. It brings in the resources that allows us to do more things beyond what we get from support from the town, beyond what we get support from the Friends. There are opportunities to be had, but you need people who know how to find them and would be capable of writing a successful grant.
So the only thing I have, and here this is the finance committee, we're all about money and budgets and revenues and expenses. All these services are for free.
Yes.
Have we ever thought about charging other libraries, other towns
So-
having a service kind of structure, fee structure
So
for?
in Massachusetts, they're called free public libraries. So under the statutes, there are a minimum number of services that we have to provide to be certified, and we cannot charge for them.
Oh, by law?
So now there are services beyond those basic services that you can charge for. One of the difficulties that I individually have is when people come through the door, I don't want to look at them and try to determine whether or not they can afford to have this service and the other person can't. So the focus for me in the time we've been at North Andover is that the services that we have can be available to everybody without needing to make those kinds of judgments.
That's a regular challenge of anybody that operates a municipal facility, is that if for some reason what's introduced is the prospect of delivering a service through, because it's always a vendor relationship, right? Then, because someone's gonna have to facilitate that, then it's who gets the right to do that. Because it's not like we're gonna add staff and charge a service for that staff in that way. So typically there'd be vendor relationships and using municipal structures to provide a service. You have a cost that includes a vendor of some sort, someone hosting or putting on that event requires, gets somewhat complicated in terms of how to do that. Has to be procured and whether you're gonna, so the core services must be free. That's really what we provide. The extra services when the opportunities present themselves. We do get federal funding and state funding. State funding ends up as federal funding, so that's part of the reason. Two things. Kathleen's comments tonight, along with certainly Irene's and Kathy's. One, let me say, make me realize, not that I don't every day, but make me realize what a really great place this is to work. It's just as Kathleen goes on about some of the people she's hired and their experiences, I can say the same thing about Kathleen and Kathy and Irene. It's just that kind of place to work. Two, in this sort of odd mental model I had, I always decided that if we could find some land and develop our own town, we would make town government look a little bit like a mall. Because we would put all the resources in one giant space and overlap those resources so that we would all get the advantage of being with each other more often, because we are our own incubators when we get that opportunity. So listening to Kathleen helps me think about what goes on there, because we don't do that enough. And it also would provide what the modern society provides. Sometimes the physical buildings are impediments, and I don't mean physical impediments in terms of mobility. It means that we're impatient people, and we don't want to stop at the youth center and the library, and we don't. And sometimes the library and the senior center suffer under those kind of things. I've got to stop. I've got to get out. I've got to get a book. And this sort of mental model I have is a community center around the municipal mall, is that you can do all of those things, and maybe there'd be private, opportunities too, and the town would be this, giant mall of America.
With a big food court.
Not so bad. Big food court, we got some Dunkin' Donuts in there. But the quasi, so maybe I'll buy some land in the Midwest, but beyond that, I think, what Kathleen and really, what Irene, both I really identify is, we must find ways, because we're not that mall, right, it probably won't be, loosens.
I just look at Osmond Landing all the time.
Square feet, right? We can put a lot of.
Different topic for a different day. Anyway, now I'm thinking about something else.
Yeah, there you go.
So, but if we're not gonna be that place, then we need to find ways, right, to link what we do. A little bit we talked about with the senior center. We can't provide all the services our seniors require in one building. So as a community, and I think Kathleen's really identified some of those things, we need to find a way for our residents to realize there's an overlap, that we're not parochial within ourselves, that we need to find a way to use our own resources. How can we use the library more so that our residents know that it's an asset? How can we bring our own services and cross the borders that all communities do the same thing, We all want our own buildings, to operate our own departments with our own staff. And I think in the long term, a successful community has to find ways, as Kathleen has, and certainly Jen Price's name's been mentioned, this opportunity to overlap these resources makes the facilities more viable, it makes it more vibrant, it makes them more attractive to our users. So the more we can do to overlap those things, whether they're public-private or public-public relationships, the better we are in delivering our service. And and I think it's happening at the library, which is great, easy group to support. Kathleen's easy to support.
Yes.
Andrew, I have an idea.
Yep.
Why not having, meet the town manager on Friday, 1 o'clock in the library? He's right there, and you can talk to him, in a more
Can they submit the
relaxed.
questions in advance?
Yeah, but
Or move it to Jamie.
But all those things are try, and I think you see it here with really staff, which is great, but that kind of, this doesn't happen everywhere. Kinds of relationships and projects and programs, however small they may seem, 19 kids impacts a lot of people. But those things are what we need to think of more, ways to sort of cross those barriers so that our residents recognize that regardless of the physical plant they're in, it's all part of an overall program that they get as a service.
Well, you actually sort of implemented that in a way, which is the services operational, right? If you think about IT services across this community, there's a certain way there's actually a running example of a number of services you've done like that. So maybe the challenge mentally, or the challenge of this picture is how do you take, the schools, the senior center, right, the library, all that. Could you apply the same model to that? What if you did? What would that look like?
But
Shared services all the way across.
So I
From
have
all of North
to,
Andover?
this is such a good idea, I have to butt in. So, but the implication here, and sort of what you're saying is, the reason why this is happening, the reason why you had this brainstorm is because you had all these people in the room communicating this information all at one time. So now I challenge you to get, the head of the library, the senior center, the youth center, all in a room periodically, and do this kind of brainstorming and say, how can we share services, do this? And, you can bring in non-government groups like, if you'll pardon the expression, the Historical Society or churches and synagogues in town, or whatever the organizations are that provide services, get them all in a room and say, how can we share? How can we do the North Andover Mall of America? How do we make that happen? And so my takeaway from this is that's what we learned tonight is get everybody in the room, they start telling about their stuff, and everybody's like, that's great, I could do that with this, and then we could. So let's just all get in a room and start brainstorming like that.
We do that in a less formal way, but certainly like Kathleen identified her relationship with Irene, and part of our division director structure is intended to coordinate some of those services, but I think, and I think you're right, generally, it's that concept which can't be delivered that has changed some of how we view things, but we really need to do more, because we hear today, you just have to, I could listen to Kathleen for another hour, I probably will get too hungry to do so, but it's a great story, right? It makes you just makes you feel excited and good about your community.
Yeah. My takeaway is that the environmental barriers, the silos that would prevent even the getting together aren't there. This has been a good news night. I mean, just to see what's been happening. And that wasn't the case several years ago when I'm sure there were infighting relative to, I want 5%. Oh, no, you can't have that, So I'm not seeing that. I'm saying the sharing of resources from the school is a great example. And what's the cost?
Never happened.
Right, never would have.
Yeah.
Get your own, So,
It was interesting when I first, I don't mean to make it personal, but when I first came, I said to Kathy, because he was, quite frankly, it was obvious to me in about 30 seconds that Kathy was the person I could trust to give me an opinion. Whether I like the opinion, I still got the opinion. And I said, so tell me what the biggest impediment is here. And she says, there's a lot of silos. We repeated the term often around here, around that concept. It wasn't something I shared generally, but I'm sharing now with you in the public. It was the term that someone fairly new to the organization had identified as our limitation. And so we use it less often.
So people had withdrawn into their silos?
I think it's a little bit human nature. It happens in corporate America as well, but I think just generally
So it was much more territorial?
Yeah, we get focused on our own lives and we forget to think we're part of something bigger, right? And that's what the recognition needs to be. We're part of
And also
something
when
bigger.
resources are really scarce.
The resources, yes.
People really tend to hoard into their silo and keep what's mine.
Yes, it becomes sort of a castle fortress sort of mentality, and nobody is cooperating with anybody else.
Yeah.
You have to know that if you don't get what you need today, because someone else needs it, that you may get it tomorrow, right? You can't feel like you don't get it today, that you don't get it forever. And that is a little bit institutionalized in good economies and bad, sometimes in municipal governments. And people eventually have to trust the dialogue which says, I didn't get it this time because someone else needs the service and the dollars, but it doesn't mean I don't have an opportunity to get it next time. And that permeates very directly in the capital plan. I find it more directly sometimes that way, and how we operate. So when the departments start to trust that we are hearing them, even if we can't fulfill that goal that year, and they recognize the second year they have the opportunity, that over a period of time, it makes all of our lives, quite frankly, consensus budgets possible and more of these things possible, because the department heads don't come in that territorial fashion as it comes to budget development. This budget development is about as territorial, is that word? Can I make that up? It's about as territorial as possible. They submit requests. They were very reasonable requests. They explain what their needs were, and it also works.
So
It is a
people,
trust game.
they don't feel like they're under attack? Far from that. It's a matter of trusting that you have been, that you've been heard, and eventually things will be fine.
But the change has been the level playing field that the town manager has established.
Yes.
For all of us. Because it wasn't necessarily a level playing field prior to his appointment.
Well, exactly, and I think there was a time when things were pretty rough.
And everyone knows what the rules are.
Yeah. You know,
We all play by the same set of rules.
moving away from the time when things were really rough is a very, very good thing, and I think we just have to preserve our current operating environment.
This is the golden age of North Andover.
Yes.
Just saying.
Write that down.
Put that on the next annual budget.
Yeah, okay.
The golden
It's-
age of
From my standpoint, it's been a real pleasure to work with people with differing views in a very comfortable environment. I love the contribution that everyone brings, and I've learned an awful lot. And I just hope that things continue that way.
Just a funny kind of comment, I'm seeing a book in front of our chairman.
Yes.
And relative to the discussion with the library, is there a quid pro quo going on here relative to a late book and what expectations would
Library books.
See, one of the things about libraries is we don't require anybody to tell anybody else what they're reading. What you choose to read is between you and your book, or you and your, DVD player. We just want to hope we just hope you're reading, whatever it is.
You don't turn read this anymore, or maybe you do.
Only if you want to get the summer prizes.
That's right.
Summer prizes are still, summer reading is still driven with incentives because there are many people who don't appreciate reading for itself. So that's part, and that's, for us, summer reading is all about putting the fun back into it. So I'll say, I don't care, read the newspaper for an hour, read a magazine, read a comic book. If it's got words, or even if you listen to a book on CD, or download the new audiobooks from Overdrive, it's exposure, to literacy in the different forms now. So you'll be hearing about summer reading before too long. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. Okay. On the school budget update, the status, Tim was kind enough to pass over what we had. And it does look like there would be a need for about $165,000 out of the special education reserve. So I think that's something to keep in mind as a backdrop as we go through the budget process, and we'll hear from the school committee in more sort of detail, and we can look at that.
Is that, yeah, what is the problem with the circuit breaker?
What's What's the question?
I'm sorry, so the next item on our agenda was the school department budget update. And we got that budget update from Mr. Mealy, Assistant Superintendent Mealy, which said that it looks like there's going to be a projected requirement for about $165,000 from the Special Education Stabilization Fund. And in his report, he cites two things, that the circuit breaker was reduced by $100,000, and that then there are other changes in sort of the normal ups and downs in special education funding, which are placement changes over time.
Placement changes, whatever.
So this question or concern that I had is not understanding what were the dynamics relative to the change in the amount of money coming from the circuit breaker by $100,000. I mean, to me, that seemed like money that you needed to sort of count on all of a sudden because of state cuts.
Absolutely.
So do you know any more than that, Stan?
Every year, they can vary that percentage that they reimburse. And that's this year's amount, which resulted in that reduction. So, we typically been running 72%. I think this percentage is 70, which is, the delta there's the 100,000. So it's not a guarantee. It's not fixed. It's not a fixed percentage every year. It varies every single year. And I don't know if you all recall it, in the 2009, 10, 11, it went down to 40.
Right.
It was a dramatic decrease, and we used a lot of the ARRA and SFSF funds for special education expenditures. There was this enormous gap created by the reduction in circuit breaker funds because the state didn't have the money. So it's not a guaranteed deal.
Okay. Right.
So do we, of course, there are statistics that can show year by year what that percentage was. Is that taken into account when determining the amount that's?
And I think the funding of, the wording of reduced by 100,000 is perhaps a little misleading. It just didn't meet our expectations to 100. I think that's a more accurate way to look at it, as opposed to.
When you're planning on it, I think it's more than just meeting expectations.
Right.
It's like that money has to come from somewhere else now.
Right.
Because they're going to spend the budget, or they reduce the spending of the budget.
Right.
Yeah, I just didn't know it fluctuated like that.
Well, my recollection is that the budgeting at 70 to 72 is based on sort of the recent history. Matter of fact, I think this fiscal year is 70%? Yeah, so historically, that's been the window, but yet that couple of percent, yeah, a draft is more than a cold sometimes.
Okay. So at this time, I don't think we have any action. That's sort of an update. We are going to vote on the CIP, the capital improvement plan tonight. And what I would propose, I've pulled up the plan. I'm looking at page, sorry, it's hard to read on the PDF. I'm looking at page 1, which has all the projects lifted out, and we're talking about the FY18. So we've traditionally voted these as line item by line item, and so what I'll do is, and maybe we can figure out a good process. Tim, you're gonna make the motions. You're gonna second the motions.
Oh, I can make motion.
You can make the motions, and Chris, you're gonna second them. And I'll call the roll. And so off page 1, and that. You have it? Yeah.
No, I've got it.
You got it? Okay.
I motion, this is on line 1, I move to accept the capital improvement budget for fiscal year 18 for facilities master plan of $6,647,500, as documented in the capital improvement plan of 2018-2022.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye. I move that we accept the capital improvement plan for playground improvements of $50,000 for fiscal year 18, as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I move that the municipal IT budget for fiscal year 18 of $50,000 information tech be accepted as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move that we accept the forestry vehicle capital improvement budget of $65,000 as documented for fiscal year 18, as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move that we accept the roadway improvements for fiscal year 18 presented by the Public Works of $1,210,000 for fiscal year 18 as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye. I move that we accept the sidewalks capital improvement plan as presented by the Public Works for $75,000 for fiscal year 18 as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye. I move that we accept the water and High Street Lights, Road, and Streetscape Improvement Plan for fiscal year 18, presented by the Public Works, $475,000 is documented in the capital improvement plan of 2018-2022.
Second the motion?
All in favor? Aye.
I move that we accept the building maintenance plan as presented by Facilities of $225,000 for fiscal year 18, as documented in the capital improvement plan of fiscal year 218 through 222.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move that we accept the sport turf field surface replacement as presented by the school of $750,000 as for fiscal year 18, as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move that we accept the school IT capital improvement plan budget is of $100,000 as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And just for the record, the sum total of all those amounts, as documented in the capital improvement plan of 2018-2022, is $9,647,500.
Okay, great, thank you, Tim. Next, we're going to move to the SOAR capital budget, which is on page 83.
I'm sorry. There you go.
Improvements.
I make a move that we accept the improvements to various sewer pump stations for fiscal year 18 of $100,000 as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, I just lost my page here.
On page 99.
No, yeah, it's the, yep.
I move that we accept the ozone system capital improvement plan as presented by the Water Department of $2,200,000 as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye. I move that we accept the chemical storage tanks and feed system as presented by the Water Department for $225,000 for fiscal year 18 as documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye. For the record, the two projects there total $2,425,000 for the Water Department. We move on to the Stevens Estates Enterprise Fund.
I move that we accept, that's on page 123, I move that we accept the main house boiler and plumbing improvements for fiscal year 18 of $75,000 as documented in the capital improvement plan of 2018-2022.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye. I move that we accept exterior infrastructure / grounds improvement of $35,000 capital improvement plan presented by the Stevens Estate and as presented and documented in the 2018-2022 capital improvement plan.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I think we're all set with the CIP. So, thank you. So, what we have left is approval for minutes of public comment. So,
I know, you interrupted enough tonight.
no, yeah, Chief.
Yeah, I just, I'll say that this thing I said at the selectmen's meeting the other day, Stan Lippert, 43 Stonefield Road. I can never say enough good things about our town manager, the good that he's brought to our town, particularly this process, the financial budgeting process here. It's been a breath of fresh air for us on the school side, and it's made life better, easier, and more useful for everything we do. So I can never say enough good things about how this process has improved and continues to improve. I mean, I think we're getting even better at it all the time. So I would always want to throw in my 2 cents on that subject, and I know you all feel the same way about it, but I just think it's important. Huh?
And I just want to say, he's a great facilitator, he's been training very good with facilitators in each of his departments. I mean, it's clear he's
That's right.
passing down the knowledge. So.
Right.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so it's good. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay, so for our final, we have 3 sets of minutes to approve today, and then we'll be all caught up.
All right.
So we'll start with January 10th, which I passed down the table. I passed my copy down the table with the page number of the presentation, I think. Yeah, there we go. Why don't we just take a minute and then I'll entertain motions relative to the January 10th, 2017 meeting minutes.
Yep.
We have a motion?
Motion to accept the minutes as written for January 10th, 2017.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next we'll move to the minutes for January 17th.
See how much is left. It'll be fun, don't worry about it. Yeah, no, it's nutty. Tried. Just New England.
Do we have any motions relative to the meeting minutes of January 17th?
I hereby move we accept the minutes for the meeting date January 17th, 2017 as presented.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thomas.
Thomas.
All did.
Okay, we're left with the minutes from January 24th, 2017. We have a motion relative to the minutes of January 24th.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented for January 24th, 2017.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. That concludes our minutes and our agenda. We are off next week, and then we begin with the last week of February right through March with weekly operating budget meetings. I think that, one thing, maybe if we could take a moment before we leave, and for our new, well, today it's just one new member because our other new member's not here, but if there's any advice you want to give now that we have this hefty docket in terms of what you do when you approach the budget, and how you look at it. I would say the number one thing I do is I go back and look at last year's. I go back and look at last year's goals and compare them to the accomplishments. And so that's all online, or there might even be a hard copy sitting around. That's one thing that's one thing I do, and try to see that those line up. And then I think we all do, and it's very well, it's an award-winning presentation of the budget that we can see what was spent last year. So we're always looking at the variances and questioning those. I would say that's a lot of what I do. I'll put it into I put it into a spreadsheet kind of on a line, not for every single line item, but for department by department, that I'll share out, because it's nice to see sort of historically how things have moved. And then a lot of times you dig into what part of that movement is a mapping or change in function, and what part of it is a change in scope and so forth. So that brings up some good questions. Basically what I do. I don't know if any other ideas on how to start doing your homework?
The bulk of the operating budget is salaries, which translates into headcount. So I'm always paying attention to the change in headcounts, and I know it seems minuscule, but I'm looking at the school department as an example right now, and missing from there is 17 and 18 information relative to full-time equivalents. I don't know if that's the way it's always been, but I'm interested in knowing, because there's been such shifting going on for fiscal year 18. I'd like to see it happen, see where it all plays out.
I would agree with that.
So that's my curiosity.
Executive summary has a small section on headcount.
Right.
School and town. So in the executive summary under the headcount section, there's actually a 2 or 3 sentence narrative on the FTE change within the school department. So they don't typically submit it to the product, that's their budget. You get a headcount list for the municipal side of the state, but there is about a 3 sentence narrative, there's a 5 FTE change, and it explains what makes up the 5 FTE change.
Page 6.
Okay, so that's a net change. And here's where I'm coming from is the shared payroll, for example, came back, and it's going to be filled in by the school department. So that's really a net 1 up, right? The way I'm looking at that?
It's it's a net 525 change, one of which is an add to replace the payroll. So on the town side, the payroll ends up coming in as a straight wash.
Right.
On the school side, they needed to add.
They have to have it
So
up.
of the 525 FTE increase, there's a net 1 to the payroll position, 3 FTE change to elementary school teachers.
Yeah.
One of which was carried in last year's budget as a placeholder.
Yep.
There's a math coach for I think a 1 FTE K-6 math coach.
Yeah.
And a .25 FTE on a reading specialist. I think that, if my memory serves me, that's the 5.25. How close was it?
No, that's very good. Be close.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
On the town side, it's a 152 on the FTE
Right.
changes. One is actually taking on the responsibility of a salary from someone that was in, under the school budget, under the IT department, the last employee that was funded through the school department, where everybody else is served through the shared IT. So we we moved the salary, not the person, into the shared column.
Okay.
Which in turn, by moving the salary into the shared column, you'll see that on the FTE change. So it went from the school side, really not the body shift, just the dollar shift. And so you'll see that on our side as a 1 FTE change, 0.19 FTE change on adding 2.5 hours to the veterans clerical position, and 0.33 FTE change
Library.
on adding the library staff, for a total of 1.52 FTE change.
So I think you know your budget well. Thank you.
Pop quiz. I guess the only piece of advice that I would add is that we are here as the representatives of the citizens of the town. So the question that always comes to my mind is if somebody looking at this cold, just, I don't know anything about this, but I'm here in town, I'm paying taxes. What's gonna leap out at them? What's the question, or how come? So I try to look at it with those sort of eyes sometimes, because we get over analytical, but yet to most of the folks in our community, it's really, there's generally 1 or 2 how come questions, or what does this mean? So that, I find that helpful.
Great.
The other thing I would say, Tim, is that if you have questions for the department, like the school department.
Yeah, they can come through me and we'll,
And send them on ahead, so
Right.
they can try to bring the answers with them,
Yeah, perfect. I will.
if you want to know.
Just a comment. I hadn't seen it before, but today I saw the pie chart on the budget. That's pretty cool.
yeah.
Pie charts.
I was only thinking of the general citizen, and then you go in and you're like, oh, click on that. Like, oh,
There we go,
that's
exactly.
where my money goes.
Yeah.
So my tip would be, start with your own personal tax bill. Put it into the formula on the,
Yes.
right? Start to see how your tax bill is divided amongst departments in terms of your costs. So what you give to us, right, finance committee and citizens at home, what you give to us and how that's divided in real terms through that tool, right?
Yeah.
Then look at the budget from that perspective.
Sure.
That's good too.
I'm
Yeah.
giving $300 toward public safety as an example. And how does that $300 translate? What am I getting? Getting, 50 some odd firefighters, getting 40 some odd police officers, what am I getting?
Yeah.
So I think not for you folks as much, but for those folks who are using that tool, put in your actual tax bill.
You bet.
And then start to use those chunks to translate whether you feel like what you're getting translates.
That's a great idea,
Like that.
Yeah.
So is that evident right on the front page of the website for the town?
On the budget.
In the front
It's
center.
it's one link down.
You would have to go into the budget link.
Yeah.
But if you look at the front middle
Yeah.
panel, there's major,
Yeah, I can.
the third one down says budget, you click on that.
You click on budget, but there's not a great big banner that says on the front page.
No.
But
But there
plug your tax bill in under the budget. No,
Once
okay.
you click, you
Yeah,
can,
you need, it's one
Oh,
step.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
but
Even you can do it, Karen.
even I can.
Yeah.
Yay.
No, and here it is. I mean, it's.
Really quickly, we previously discussed allocating different sections to eventually kind of be in charge of the ultimate statement.
Right.
Could we kind of have that discussion sooner rather than
Yeah,
later?
I'll put it on the agenda for next time. I'll pull up. I don't have actually I'll just have to dig through my emails and find how we split it up last year, and I'll pass it out and we can talk about it next
Okay,
meeting.
that way, while we're going through this, we can have that.
I thought the new members are writing
The whole thing, right?
the magic template.
Okay, I think,
Thank you.
okay. All right. Do we have a motion?
Motion away.
In this meeting?
Thank you.
Second.
Thanks. All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Bye.